I never expected that a teammate's shoulder injury would completely change my life, but that's exactly what happened. Sometimes the biggest shifts don't come from a loud bang, but from a quiet, sustained period of forced proximity, a disruption to the rhythm of a life you thought you had all figured out. Mine was a life measured in lengths of the pool, in the steady, metronomic beat of my own heart underwater, and in the familiar, sterile scent of chlorine that clung to my skin and hair like a second identity. My name is Lucas. At the time, I was 20 years old, a junior in college, and a member of the university swim team. I wasn't the star, not by a long shot. I was the reliable one, the guy who always showed up, put in the work, and never caused any trouble. My world was a small, contained loop, the apartment I shared with no one, the lecture halls where I tried to absorb information about architectural history, and the natatorium. The pool was my sanctuary and my prison, a place of intense physical exertion that allowed me to turn my brain off, to stop the constant hum of low-grade anxiety that was the background music of my life. I lived in a state of quiet observation. I saw everything. I saw the way the morning light hit the water, shattering into a million brilliant pieces. I saw the subtle shift in a swimmer's form that signaled fatigue. And I saw Caleb. Of course, I saw Caleb. Everyone saw Caleb. He was our team captain, and he was impossible to miss. He was everything I wasn't: loud, effortlessly confident, the gravitational center of any room he entered. He moved with a kind of fluid grace that was mesmerizing, both in the water and out. In the pool, he was a force of nature, cutting through the water with a power that seemed almost violent in its efficiency. On the pool deck, he was the sun around which the rest of our team orbited. He was always laughing, clapping someone on the back, his voice a warm, easy rumble that carried across the echoing space. He was, to my quiet and watchful eyes, the very definition of a man completely at ease in his own skin, a man who belonged. I, on the other hand, always felt like I was visiting, like I had been given a temporary pass into this world of casual masculinity and had to be careful not to do anything that might get it revoked. So I kept my head down, did my laps, and admired Caleb from a safe, silent distance. He was just a fact of my environment, like the scent of chlorine or the irritatingly high-pitched whistle our coach used. He was an object of distant, abstract appreciation, like a statue in a museum. Beautiful, impressive, and completely, utterly untouchable. I assumed, as everyone did, that he lived in a world of pretty girls and beer-soaked parties, a world that ran parallel to mine but would never, ever intersect. That's how life works sometimes, isn't it? You build these walls and categories in your mind, sorting people into boxes to make the world feel more predictable. He was in the straight, popular, unattainable box. I was in the quiet, awkward, invisible box. And that was that. The system worked. Until one Tuesday afternoon, when the entire carefully constructed architecture of my world began to creak and groan, threatening to collapse. It happened during a particularly brutal practice. We were doing sprint sets, and the air was thick with tension and exhaustion. Coach was pushing us hard, preparing for an important meet. I was in the lane next to Caleb, which was always a mixed blessing. It was motivating, seeing his perfect form right there, but it was also a constant reminder of the gap between his talent and my own. On the final turn of the final set, I saw him falter. It was a tiny thing, a hitch in the rotation of his right shoulder, but it was enough. He finished the lap, but when he pulled himself out of the water, his face was a tight mask of pain. The next day, he wasn't in the pool. He was on the deck, dressed in sweats, his arm in a sling. A collective murmur went through the team. Caleb injured? It seemed impossible. He was our anchor. The diagnosis was a severe rotator cuff strain. Overtraining, the doctor said. No swimming for at least a month, and a strict regimen of physical therapy. A month, in the middle of our season, was an eternity. You could feel the morale of the team deflate like a punctured lung. Let me explain how my world tilted on its axis. A few days later, after practice, Coach Miller called me into his office. His office was a small, cluttered space that smelled of damp towels and coffee. He got right to the point, as he always did. "Lucas," he said, leaning back in his squeaky chair. "Caleb needs some help. The trainers are swamped, and he needs someone to walk him through his stretching routines after our practices. Someone reliable. Someone who understands the movements." I just stared at him, my heart starting to thump a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. I couldn't process it. Why me? There were other guys who were actually friends with Caleb. But Coach Miller had his reasons. You live just a couple blocks from the gym, right? And you're one of the most disciplined swimmers I have. You won't let him slack off, but you also won't let him push it too hard. I trust your judgment. My mind was a blank slate. All I could manage was a nod. Yeah, sure, coach. I can do that. Hope is a strange, treacherous thing. It had been dormant in me for so long I had forgotten what it felt like. Now, it was a tiny, fragile green shoot pushing its way through cracked concrete. This was just a practical arrangement, a favor for the team. But another part of me, a part one had been ruthlessly suppressing, saw it for what it was, an opportunity. Sustained, close proximity. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. The first session was monumentally awkward. The locker room slowly emptied out, the usual boisterous noise fading until it was just the drip of a distant shower and the hum of the ventilation system. And us. Caleb was sitting on a bench, looking uncharacteristically subdued. He had his physical therapy instruction sheet in his hand, a complicated diagram of stretches and movements. Hey, he said, not quite meeting my eyes. Thanks for doing this, man. Seriously. Coach's orders, I guess. It's no problem. I replied, my voice sounding a little too high. I pulled up a mat, and we started. I was hyper-aware of everything. The way his t-shirt stretched across his good shoulder, the faint scent of his soap, the quiet hiss of his breath as I guided his injured arm through a slow, careful rotation. My instructions were clinical, detached. Just to the point of tension. Don't push past it. Tell me when to stop. My hands had to make contact with him. There was no way around it. My fingers would press gently into his shoulder blade to stabilize him, or my hand would cup his elbow to guide the motion. Each point of contact felt like a small electric shock. I was sure he could feel how nervous I was, that he could feel the tremor in my hands. But if he did, he gave no sign. He just grunted in response to my questions, his focus entirely on the movements, his jaw tight with the effort of it all. For the first week, it was like that. Stilted. Professional. We were two colleagues engaged in a task. We talked about swimming, about the team, about the upcoming meet he was going to miss. The conversations were safe, impersonal. I was just the guy helping him with his exercises. But I was still observing. And I started to see the cracks in the confident facade. I saw the deep frustration in his eyes when a simple movement caused a spark of pain. I saw the flicker of anxiety when he talked about his scholarship. He wasn't a statue. He was just a person, and he was hurting. The shift happened gradually. It began with small talk that wasn't about the team. One afternoon, he noticed the book sticking out of my backpack, a history of Italian Renaissance architecture. You're into that stuff? He asked, a genuine note of curiosity in his voice. I mumbled something about it being for a class. No, that's cool, he said. I always thought that would be interesting. All those domes and arches. It's like frozen music, you know? Frozen music. The phrase caught me off guard. It was poetic, thoughtful. It wasn't something I expected to come out of Caleb's mouth. Yeah, I said, finding my voice. That's a good way to put it. We ended up talking about architecture for 20 minutes. He asked smart questions, and for the first time, I felt myself relax. I wasn't just the quiet swimmer. I was a person with interests, and he was actually listening. He started to open up, bit by bit. He told me about the immense pressure from his father, a former college athlete himself, who saw Caleb's swimming career as a non-negotiable path to success. He doesn't get it when I talk about anything else, Caleb confessed one day, his voice low. It's like, if it's not about getting a faster time, it's a waste of breath in that moment. The larger-than-life team captain disappeared, replaced by a son struggling under the weight of expectation. That revelation did something to me. It deepened my attraction from simple physical appreciation into something more empathetic, more real. He wasn't just the son. He had his own dark spots, his own fears. Then came the small, significant moment that I would replay in my mind 1,000 times. We were in the training room, and I was helping him with an ice pack on his shoulder. We were sitting side by side on one of the therapy tables, our legs brushing against each other. The silence was comfortable now, not strained. He had been quiet for a while, just staring at the floor. Then he looked at me, a soft, tired smile on his face. You know, Lucas, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I don't know what I'd be doing without you. I'd probably have wrecked my shoulder for good by now. Or gone crazy. It's nothing, I said, my standard self-deprecating response. I'm just following the sheet. He shook his head slowly. No, it's not nothing. He shifted slightly, and his hand, his good one, covered mine where it rested on the vinyl of the table between us. It wasn't a grab or a pat. His hand just settled over mine, warm and firm. It only lasted for a second or two before he pulled away, as if he'd just realized what he'd done. But the heat of it lingered on my skin. Thanks, he said again, and this time he held my gaze for a long moment. My heart felt like it was going to beat its way out of my chest. That single, fleeting touch changed everything. The boundary between us had become porous, indistinct. The question was no longer if something was happening, but what it was. The air in the training room became thick with unspoken things. After that brief touch, our careful dynamic shattered. Hope and anxiety began a frantic, dizzying dance in my chest. Every session was charged with a new kind of energy. The space between us seemed to hum. I was acutely aware of his proximity, of the way his eyes would sometimes linger on me when he thought I wasn't looking. The casual locker room nudity that had once been an unremarkable part of our environment now felt loaded with tension. I found myself averting my eyes, my face flushing for no reason. And then came the day that served as the turning point, the moment that burned itself into my memory with the clarity of a flashbulb. Caleb had had a frustrating check-in with the doctor. His recovery was slower than he wanted, and the big mid-season invitational was looming. He was quiet and coiled with a frustrated energy all through his exercises. He pushed himself too hard, ignoring my cautions. I could see the pain tightening the corners of his mouth, but he wouldn't stop. When we were done, he tried to stand up from the mat, and a sharp, audible gasp of pain escaped his lips. He swayed, his face pale. "Whoa, take it easy," I said, instinctively reaching out and grabbing his arm to steady him. He leaned on me heavily, his head dropping forward. "Sorry," he muttered, his voice strained. "Just a bad 1 inch. Come on," I said, my own panic rising. "Let's get you to the showers." The warm water might help getting him. There was a slow, careful process. My arm was around his waist. His good arm was slung over my shoulders. I could feel the heat radiating from his body, the tremor of overworked and injured muscles. The locker room was completely empty, the lights casting long shadows on the wet tiles. It felt like our own private world, sealed off from everything else. He leaned against the cool tile of the wall next to the showers while I turned on the water, adjusting the temperature until steam began to billow out into the room. He was struggling to pull his sweat-soaked t-shirt over his head, hissing in pain as the movement jarred his shoulder. "Here," I said, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. "Let me." I stood in front of him, my hands going to the hem of his shirt. It was such an intimate gesture. My fingers brushed against the warm, firm skin of his stomach as I carefully, slowly, pulled the fabric up and over his head, being excruciatingly gentle with his injured arm. For a moment, we were frozen there. I was holding his shirt, and he was standing bare-chested in front of me, less than a foot away. I could see the frantic pulse beating in the hollow of his throat. His eyes, when they met mine, were wide and unguarded. The confident team captain was gone. This was just Caleb, vulnerable and raw. "Thanks," he breathed, the word a puff of warm air against my face. He didn't move away. He just stood there, looking at me as if he was seeing me for the first time. The sound of the water pounding against the shower floor filled the silence. I could feel the heat on my face, from the steam, from his proximity, from the blood rushing to my cheeks. I wanted to lean in. I wanted to close the small distance between us. But I was paralyzed by a mixture of desire and absolute terror. The moment stretched, taut and fragile, before he finally broke the eye contact and stepped carefully into the stall, disappearing behind the curtain of steam and water. I just stood there, his shirt still in my hands, my heart hammering against my ribs like it wanted to escape. The aftermath of that moment was a thick, suffocating silence. The easy camaraderie we had built over the past couple of weeks vanished, replaced by a tense and agonizing awkwardness. It was like we had both seen something we weren't supposed to see, and now neither of us knew how to pretend we hadn't. Caleb became distant. During our sessions, his answers were clipped, his eyes focused on the floor, the wall, anywhere but on me. The comfortable silences were now filled with a humming tension that was almost unbearable. He would find excuses to have another teammate hang around until we were done, a buffer to prevent us from being truly alone. The easy conversations about architecture and family pressure were gone. We were back to the clinical, detached language of physical therapy, but now it felt like a flimsy shield, a desperate attempt to rebuild the professional boundary I had so carefully helped him tear down in the shower. He was polite, always remembering to thank me, but it was a cold, formal gratitude that was worse than anger. It felt like dismissal. My mind, in response, turned into a relentless, 24-hour analysis machine. I replayed the moment in the locker room endlessly, examining it from every possible angle. It was like watching a film strip frame by frame, searching for a clue I might have missed. The way I helped him with his shirt, the look in his eyes, the charged air between us. Had I imagined it all? Was the intensity purely a product of my own longing? My internal monologue became a vicious cycle of hope and despair. One moment, I'd be convinced that he had felt it too. The vulnerability in his eyes was real. The way he just stood there, not moving away, had to mean something, right? He was just scared, as scared as I was. That thought would send a dizzying surge of hope through me, a fragile warmth spreading through my chest. I would start to believe that maybe, just maybe, this impossible thing could actually happen. But then, the fear would creep back in, cold and insidious. I would focus on his current behavior, the avoidance, the silence. I had made him uncomfortable. I had crossed a line. My help had been misinterpreted as a predatory advance. He was a straight guy, the team captain, and I, the quiet, weird guy, had taken advantage of his moment of weakness. The shame would wash over me, hot and sickening. I felt like a creep. I was convinced I had ruined everything, not just a potential connection, but even the simple, functioning dynamic we had. He probably dreaded our sessions, couldn't wait for his shoulder to heal so he wouldn't have to see me anymore. This internal debate was exhausting. I wasn't sleeping well. My focus in class was shot. Even my performance in the pool, my one reliable escape, started to suffer. I was just going through the motions, my mind 1,000 miles away, stuck in that steamy locker room, dissecting a silence that seemed to grow heavier with each passing day. The hope was the worst part, really. It was the hope that made the anxiety so sharp. If I had never felt that spark, if he had never covered my hand with his, I could have gone back to my quiet admiration from afar. But now, I had a glimpse of something more, and the possibility of it being slammed shut in my face was a constant, gut-wrenching dread. I just wanted it to be over. I wanted an answer, any answer, so I could stop living in this unbearable state of limbo. A week passed like this, a week of torturous, polite silence. I had decided to just get through it. I would be as professional and distant as possible, give him an easy out. I would prove to him, through my actions, that he had nothing to worry about, that whatever he thought he saw in my eyes that day was a mistake. I was just trying to help. It was a miserable strategy, but it was the only one I had. Then came the day it all broke. It was a Thursday. Practice had run late, and by the time we got to the locker room, it was nearly deserted. Just a few of the other guys were showering and getting dressed, their voices echoing in the big, tiled space. I went through the stretching routine with Caleb in a state of high alert, our movements efficient and silent. I was planning my escape. As soon as we were done, I was going to pack my bag and bolt, offering a quick "see you tomorrow" over my shoulder. But Caleb had other plans. As the last teammate left, calling out a "see ya," and letting the heavy door swing shut, the atmosphere shifted. The silence was no longer empty. It was heavy, expectant. I stood up to put the mat away, my back to him. "Okay, I think that's good for today," I said, trying to keep my voice light. "Your range of motion is definitely improving." Lucas, his voice was low, and it stopped me cold. I slowly turned around. He was still sitting on the bench, staring at his hands, which were clasped between his knees. He looked nervous, his brow furrowed. This was a side of him I had never seen before. The confident team captain was nowhere in sight. This was someone younger, more uncertain. "Wait," he said. Can we talk for a second?" My heart did a painful lurch. This was it. The conversation I had been dreading and longing for all week. He was going to let me down easy, tell me to back off, thank me for my help, and end our arrangement. I braced myself for the impact. "Sure," I managed to say, my throat suddenly dry. He took a deep breath, still not looking at me. Then he stood up. He walked past me, over to the main door of the locker room. I heard the distinct, sharp click of the lock turning. My blood ran cold. My mind raced through a dozen panicked scenarios. Why was he locking the door? I watched, frozen, as he turned back to face me. His expression was a mixture of fear and something else, something I couldn't quite decipher. It looked like determination. "This past week has been hell," he started, his voice rough. He finally lifted his eyes to meet mine, and the intensity in them pinned me to the spot. "I've been a mess. Ever since. You know." The other day, he started walking toward me, slowly, deliberately. I've been trying to figure out what to say, how to say it. With every step he took forward, I took a step back, a purely instinctual retreat. My brain wasn't working. I was just reacting. My back bumped into the hard edge of one of the locker room benches, and I sank down onto it, unable to retreat any further. He stopped right in front of me, standing over me, close enough that I could feel the warmth from his body. It was an intimidating posture, but his eyes weren't angry. They were pleading. "I've been pushing you away," he said, his voice softer now. "And I'm sorry. I was just scared. I didn't know what to do." He ran a hand through his damp hair, a gesture of pure anxiety. "This thing with my shoulder. It was real. The pain, all of it. But it was also an excuse. I saw a coach looking for someone to help me, and I might have suggested your name." My breath caught in my throat. Suggested my name? What? I whispered. "I've been watching you for months, Lucas," he confessed, the words tumbling out of him now, a torrent of pent-up emotion. "At practice, in the cafeteria. You're always so quiet, in your own world. I wanted to talk to you, but I never knew how. I felt like an idiot. So when I got hurt, I saw an opportunity. It was a stupid, cowardly way to do it, I know. But it was the only thing I could think of." He knelt down then, so we were at eye level. The power dynamic shifted instantly. It wasn't about intimidation. It was about connection. It was about making himself vulnerable. And then everything started going so well. We were actually talking. I was getting to know you. And you're amazing. You're smart, and you're kind, and you actually listen. He shook his head, a wry, self-deprecating smile touching his lips. And then in the shower, I freaked out. Because everything I was feeling, this thing I've been trying to ignore about myself for years, it was suddenly right there. And it was real. And I panicked. He searched my face, his own expression stripped bare of all pretense. It was just him. Just Caleb. Anxious, hopeful, terrified Caleb. "I have to know," he said, his voice cracking slightly on the last word. "Lucas, please. Was it just me? Am I going crazy? Or did you feel it too? All the fear I had been holding onto for a week, all the anxiety, it all just dissolved. All that was left was the truth." I looked him straight in the eye, and for the first time, I didn't feel like the quiet, invisible boy. I felt like his equal. "No," I said, my voice steady and clear. "It wasn't just you." The relief that washed over his face was like watching the sun rise. The tension in his shoulders sagged, the fear in his eyes replaced by a brilliant, dazzling hope. He let out a shaky breath that was almost a laugh. "God," he whispered. And then, he closed the small distance between us. His hand came up to cup my jaw, his thumb stroking my cheek, and he kissed me. It wasn't tentative or questioning. It was a kiss full of a week's worth of unspoken tension and months of hidden longing. It was confident and sure, a confirmation of everything that now hung in the air between us. It was a beginning. In the weeks that followed, the world felt new, painted in brighter colors. The tense, silent locker room became our space. The awkwardness that had plagued us was replaced by a quiet, thrilling intimacy. We were careful, of course. We existed in the hyper-masculine world of college athletics, and neither of us was ready to navigate that yet. But in the moments we carved out for ourselves, the connection between us grew, steady and strong. It was in the small things. It was in the way he'd find me in the library, sliding into the chair opposite me and nudging my foot with his under the table, a secret smile playing on his lips. It was in the way I'd save him a seat at team dinners, and he'd sit down a little too close, our shoulders pressing together. We'd walk home from late-night study sessions, our hands brushing against each other in the dark, until one night he just took my hand, lacing his fingers through mine as if it were the most natural thing in the world. And to me, it was. He was still Caleb, the confident team captain. But I got to see the other sides of him now, the ones he kept hidden. I saw the sketch pads filled with surprisingly detailed drawings of buildings and faces. I listened as he talked about his fears and his dreams, things that had nothing to do with swimming. And he, in turn, drew me out of my shell. He celebrated my successes in a way no one else ever had, his pride in me genuine and loud. He made me feel seen, not just as a quiet observer, but as a participant in my own life. One evening, months later, we were the last to leave the natatorium again. It was a familiar scene, but the emotional landscape was completely different. The place that had once been the backdrop for my anxiety was now a place of comfort. As I was packing my bag, he came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist and resting his chin on my shoulder. I leaned back against his chest, a comfortable weight. "You know," he murmured into my ear, his voice a low rumble. "My shoulder hasn't hurt in months," I smiled, turning my head to look at him. Yeah, he said, a playful grin spreading across his face. "But I think I'm going to need you to keep checking on it. For the rest of my life." Maybe he leaned in and kissed me, a slow, easy kiss right there by the lockers. It wasn't charged with desperation or fear anymore. It was just warm and sure and full of a quiet promise. I used to think that strength was about being impenetrable, about never showing weakness. I built my life around that principle, living behind walls of silence and routine. But Caleb taught me something different. His journey wasn't about healing an injury. It was about having the courage to admit he was hurt in the first place. He showed me that true strength isn't about the walls you build, but about having the bravery to let someone in, to show them the vulnerable parts of you. It wasn't the broken part of him that brought us together. It was the shared, terrifying, beautiful process of putting the pieces back in place, together. And in doing so, we built something far stronger than anything we could have managed alone.